When Burt Reynolds walked onto the Tonight Show stage on October 14th, 1977, the studio audience erupted the way audiences only erupt for one kind of person. Not a celebrity, not a movie star, a phenomenon. Smokey and the Bandit had been in theaters since May. It had become the second highest grossing film of the year, trailing only Star Wars. Burt Reynolds was everywhere. He was on the cover of People magazine. He was on the cover of Time. He was the #1 box office draw in America. And the grin, that famous unstoppable grin, was the most recognized smile in the country. He came out from behind the curtain with his hands up like a man accepting an award he hadn't asked for, riding the applause, playing it perfectly. The audience loved him before he sat down. He was wearing a dark sport coat over an open collar shirt, his hair thick and dark, the mustache already becoming as iconic as the grin itself. He shook Johnny Carson's hand with both of his, settled into the guest chair, crossed his ankle over his knee, spread his arms wide like a man completely at home in the world. The audience laughed at nothing in particular, just the presence of him, just the fact that he existed and was here and the cameras were rolling. But here is what nobody in that studio saw. Here is the thing the cameras did not catch, and it is the only thing that matters. Backstage 40 minutes before this moment, Burt Reynolds had been sitting alone in the green room with something in his hands. Not notes, not a script. A folded piece of paper, yellow with age, soft at the creases from being opened and closed so many times that the fold lines no longer held sharp. He turned it over twice, put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, took it out again, then put it back in, left it there, and then he sat very still, which was something Burt Reynolds almost never did. The makeup artist noticed. She mentioned it to the stage manager. The stage manager mentioned it to the segment producer. Nobody knew what to do with the information because Burt Reynolds never arrived quiet. Burt Reynolds arrived filling rooms, telling stories, making everyone feel like they were already in the middle of something wonderful. Quiet was not a word anyone had ever used in the same sentence as Burt Reynolds backstage. But tonight was different. And the reason it was different is something only two people on Earth knew about. Burt Reynolds was one of them. And in 12 minutes, the second person was going to find out that Burt had been carrying it for 4 years. Wait. Before you go any further, you need to understand what was really at stake on that stage tonight. Because what Burt was carrying in that inside pocket was not just a piece of paper. It was the reason he was still alive. I often see comments from people who did not realize they were not subscribed. If you enjoy the channel, please take a second to check and make sure you are subscribed. It is free and it really helps us keep the show growing. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. And one more thing, and I mean this sincerely. We recently opened the Join feature on this channel. I want to be straight with you about something. This channel has no sponsors, not one. No brand deals, no product placements, no one paying us to say their name. Everything you see here exists purely because of this community. Joining the channel gives you access to exclusive member-only videos that we make just for members, deeper dives, early access to new stories, content we don't put anywhere else, and the knowledge that you are directly keeping this work going. We are not a corporation. We are a small team that genuinely cares about these stories. The join button is right next to subscribe. If these stories have ever given you something on a hard night, consider it. It means the world to us. Now back to Burt Reynolds. Because what is about to happen on that stage is something nobody in that studio was prepared for. To understand October 14th, 1977, you have to go back to the spring of 1973. Because in the spring of 1973, Burt Reynolds was in trouble in a way that nobody who saw the finished product of his fame would ever have guessed. Deliverance had come out in 1972, and it had changed everything and nothing at the same time. The film was a genuine masterpiece. Critics recognized it immediately. Burt's performance was raw and physical and utterly unposed. He played Lewis Medlock with a controlled ferocity that proved, beyond any reasonable argument, that there was a real actor inside the charm machine. He delivered. The reviews said so. But Hollywood being Hollywood, the lesson the studios took from Deliverance was not the lesson Burt had hoped they would take. They did not see a dramatic actor capable of range and depth and darkness. They saw a body. They saw a jaw. They saw the grin and the magnetic screen presence. And they started sending him scripts that were essentially variations of the same idea. The rugged hero. The charming rogue. The man who wins every fight and gets every girl and never for one single second lets anyone see that he is uncertain or afraid or lost. Funny has a way of becoming a cage when it is the only thing a room will let you be. People would stop listening the moment he turned serious. They were always waiting for the punchline. And so he gave it to them, because that was what Burt Reynolds did. He gave people what they wanted, and he kept the other stuff, the quiet stuff, the frightened stuff, somewhere private where nobody thought to look. In the spring of 1973, the private stuff had gotten very loud. He was living alone in a rented house in the Hollywood Hills. His schedule was full. His publicist was busy. His phone rang constantly, but never with the calls he needed. There were nights when he sat in the kitchen at midnight eating cereal out of the box because he could not think of a single person he could call and say the words, "I am not all right." Because Burt Reynolds was never not all right. That was the deal. That was the brand. That was the agreement he had made with the world somewhere along the way without fully realizing he was making it. And then came the night in April 1973 that Burt has never fully described in any public interview, but has referenced in quiet conversations with people he trusted, in language that is careful and oblique but unmistakable in what it means. He was alone. It was late. The television was on not because he was watching it, but because the silence was a specific kind of heavy that required something to push against. He was in a bad place that night, not metaphorically bad. Bad in the way that bad gets when there is no floor you can feel beneath your feet, and the distance to the bottom seems, in that particular moment, like something you might be willing to find out. He sat in front of the television, and he thought about the distance to the bottom for a long time, and The Tonight Show was on. Do not move past that detail. I need you to stay with it, because everything that happened on October 14th, 1977, grew out of what Burt Reynolds saw on that screen on a night in April 1973 when he was thinking about the distance to the bottom. Johnny Carson was in the middle of an interview. The guest doesn't matter. What matters is what Johnny did. He was asking something ordinary, and then the guest said something slightly unexpected. And instead of managing it the way a television host manages everything, Johnny just laughed. Not a performance laugh. Not the calibrated laugh that said something was funny enough to acknowledge, but not funny enough to derail the show. This was the laugh of a man who had been genuinely caught off guard and found it genuinely delightful. His whole body went into it. He leaned back, his eyes disappeared, he slapped at the desk. And it was the most real thing Burt Reynolds had seen in months. He watched it from the kitchen floor. Because at some point, without registering when, he had slid down from his chair and was sitting with his back against the cabinets, knees up, watching this man on television laugh at something completely ordinary with the kind of authentic abandon that felt like a window, like proof, like evidence that whatever the world was, it also contained that. It contained the possibility of laughing so hard you forgot to be anything else for 30 seconds. Burt sat there for a long time, then he got up, he washed his face, he went to bed. In the morning, he called his agent and said he would do the Tonight Show appearance he had been declining for 3 months. His agent assumed it was a career decision. It was not a career decision. Here is what nobody knew was coming next. The taping was scheduled for a Tuesday in late April 1973. Burt arrived early, not because he was eager, but because he did not know what else to do with himself. And sitting in the green room at NBC felt slightly more purposeful than sitting in the kitchen alone. He was still there, untouched cup of coffee going cold on the table beside him when the door opened and Johnny Carson walked in. This was not standard procedure. Hosts did not visit guests in the green room before a taping. But something had brought Johnny in early, and he looked genuinely surprised to find Burt already there. They looked at each other for a moment. "You're early," Johnny said. "So are you," Burt said. Johnny poured himself coffee from the carafe on the counter, looked at the cold cup next to Burt, and without asking, poured a fresh one and set it in front of him. He sat down across the table. Not the posture of a host making a courtesy visit. The posture of a man sitting down to actually be somewhere. "First time on the show?" Johnny asked. "That obvious?" "Little bit." Johnny picked up his cup. "You look like a man rehearsing his answers." The thing about that observation was that it was completely accurate, and Burt had not expected to be seen with that precision by a man he had met 45 seconds ago. "I'm always rehearsing something," Burt said. Johnny studied him, not performing a study, just a look. "What's going on?" he said. And Burt Reynolds, who had not told a single person that anything was going on, who had been performing fine for months, who had built an entire life around the principle of not letting anyone see what was actually happening underneath the performance, opened his mouth and said, "I don't know." That's the honest answer. I genuinely do not know. There was a silence that should have been awkward and somehow wasn't. "That's more honest than most people ever get," Johnny said. They talked for 27 minutes before the stage manager knocked. Johnny told him 5 more minutes. They took them. The interview itself was everything anyone watching would have expected. Burt was funny, charming, the audience loved him. But 9 minutes in, Johnny asked a standard question about deliverance, and Burt started to give the standard answer and then stopped and gave a different one, the real one. One sentence more honest than anything he had said on television in 3 years. Johnny heard it. He let it land without deflecting it or folding it into a joke, which on a late-night program is a rarer gift than it sounds. After the taping, Burt was back in the green room gathering his jacket when he heard the knock. He opened the door. Johnny Carson was standing in the hallway, out of his broadcasting jacket, holding 2 bottles of beer, looking entirely like a man who had nowhere else to be. "Feel like talking?" Johnny said. "Now stay with me." Because what Johnny said that night, in that green room after the building had mostly emptied out, was something Burt had not heard in a very long time. Something so simple it should not have carried the weight it did, and yet it carried all the weight in the world. "Stop trying to be the thing you think the room needs," Johnny said. "The room will take care of itself. You just be Buddy." Nobody had called him Buddy in 10 years. That was the name from before. From the football fields of Florida, from Riviera Beach, from the life before he became the thing on the posters. He had never told Johnny that was his name. Johnny had no way of knowing. He said it because it was the only name that fit what he was seeing. And what he was seeing was not a movie star. What he was seeing was a man. Burt went home that night, sat in his car in the NBC parking lot, and did not start the engine for a long time. Then he opened the glove compartment. He found a piece of paper. He wrote down what Johnny had said to him, word for word, exactly as he had said it. He folded the paper. He put it in the pocket of his jacket. He started the engine. He never threw that paper away. Not in 4 years. Not once. This is the part that changes everything. October 14th, 1977. The studio was full and warm and buzzing. Burt Reynolds had been in his dressing room since 4 in the afternoon. The segment producer had checked on him twice. Both times he was sitting quietly with a piece of paper in his hands. She had worked The Tonight Show for 6 years and had never seen a guest look quite like that before going on. Not nervous. This was something else. This was a man preparing to do something specific. At 5:15, Burt walked to Johnny's dressing room and knocked twice. He heard Johnny's voice on the other side. "Come in." He opened the door. Johnny was at the mirror adjusting his tie. He looked at Burt in the reflection. He turned around. They looked at each other across the dressing room. "I need to tell you something tonight," Burt said. "On camera. I needed to tell you first so you're not blindsided." Johnny's expression shifted. He sat on the edge of the makeup chair and looked at Burt with that particular attention that was his greatest gift. The look that made people feel like the only person in any room he had ever been in. "Okay," he said. Burt told him. Not everything. Not the kitchen floor and the thinking about the distance to the bottom. He told him about the conversation. He told him what Johnny had said. He told him that he had written it down that night in the parking lot. He told him that he had kept it. And he told him that he needed to say thank you on camera, publicly, because the private kind of gratitude had been sitting too long and had gotten too heavy to carry alone. Johnny sat very still through all of this. When Burt finished, the room was quiet. "I don't remember saying that specifically," Johnny said. "I mean, I remember you. I remember the show. But I don't remember those words." "I know," Burt said. "That's part of why I wrote them down, so one of us would." Johnny looked at his hands. Something moved across his face that had nothing to do with preparation. "Okay," he said quietly. "All right, let's do this." 15 minutes later, they walked out and the night began. Johnny's monologue was sharp. Political observations, a bit about the World Series. The audience was warm and generous and already on the side of whatever came next. When Ed McMahon's introduction came, the audience responded with the specific enthusiasm reserved for people who are genuinely beloved. Burt came out from behind the curtain with his hands up, riding it, the famous grin doing everything it always did. The first 10 minutes were precisely what anyone watching would have expected. Johnny asked about Smokey and the Bandit. Burt talked about the car chases Sally Field. He was funny and loose, and the audience was completely with him. Then something shifted. It was small. So small the studio audience didn't catch it. Most viewers at home didn't either. But the camera operator had been watching Burt's hands all through the interview. The way experienced operators watch hands when something in a guest's energy tells them that's where the truth will show first. She said afterward that the hands were the tell, both of them flat on the armrests, perfectly still. Which for Burt Reynolds, who talked with his hands the way some people breathe, was like watching the ocean go quiet before a storm. Johnny was asking about his next project, standard material. Burt gave the answer and it was fine. And then there was a natural pause, the brief intake of breath before the next thing. And in that pause, Burt turned to look at Johnny. Not the conversational look of a man waiting to answer the next question. The look of a man arriving somewhere he has been walking toward for a very long time. He leaned forward slightly. He said 6 words, not loud, not dramatic, not with the projection and timing of a man performing for an audience, with the directness of a man saying something to one specific person, something that has been waiting 4 years for exactly the right moment, and this moment, finally, is it. You kept me here, Johnny. Thank you. The studio went quiet, not the polite quiet of an audience waiting for a punchline. The complete quiet that only descends when something real has entered the room without warning. The kind of quiet that is its own sound. The kind that makes hands go still and lapse and breathe and get careful, because whatever is happening is too large to process at normal speed. Johnny Carson did not move. His face, which had been the warm, open face of a man conducting a successful interview, went still in a way entirely different from his usual stillness. His right hand, resting loosely on the desk, pressed flat, his eyes locked onto Burt's. And for a moment that everyone present would later describe as feeling much longer than it actually was, he said nothing. 12 seconds. 12 seconds of complete silence on national television. Ed McMahon, seated to Johnny's left, who had seen more Tonight Show moments than any person alive, leaned slightly forward in his chair. He would say later that in all his years beside Johnny Carson, he had never seen that expression on Johnny's face. Not during serious interviews, not during emotional tributes, not during the nights when something unexpected happened, and Johnny had to navigate without a map. What was on Johnny Carson's face in those 12 seconds was something private, something that had nothing to do with being a host, something that belonged entirely to the man underneath the job. He opened his mouth, he closed it, he pressed his lips together, and then, quietly, in a voice entirely different from his broadcast voice, he said, "Burt, what do you mean?" And Burt Reynolds told him, not the kitchen floor and the thinking about the distance to the bottom, but enough. He told him about April 1973. He told him about the green room and the cold coffee and the 27 minutes before the stage manager knocked. He told him what Johnny had said in the dressing room after the taping, the specific thing, the sentence that had reached through every layer of performance and landed somewhere true. You said, "Stop trying to be the thing you think the room needs. The room will take care of itself. You just be Buddy." He paused. His voice was level but not entirely steady. "Nobody had called me Buddy in 10 years. You didn't even know that was my name. I had never told you. But you said it, just like that, like it was obvious, like that was who you'd been talking to all along. And something about hearing it in my own name, the real one, not the one on the posters, I don't know how to explain what that did." The studio was so quiet you could hear the camera mechanisms adjusting focus. "I wrote it down that night," Burt continued. "In my car before I drove home. I've kept it. Because there were nights when I needed to read it. There were nights when I needed proof that someone had seen me that clearly, even once, even briefly, even by accident." He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the folded piece of paper. He set it on the desk between them. "I've been meaning to give this back to you for 4 years. It's yours. You just didn't know you'd written it." Johnny Carson looked at the piece of paper on the desk for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. Not the dignified glisten of a man appropriately moved. His eyes were genuinely, fully, completely wet. And he was not performing that. He was not managing it. He was simply in it, the way a person is in something real when there is no longer any reason to be anything else. He picked up the paper. He unfolded it slowly. He read it. The camera was tight on his face, and every person watching at home watched Johnny Carson read, in another man's handwriting, words he had apparently said in a dressing room in 1973 without any awareness of what they would mean to the man he said them to. He folded the paper again. He held it in both hands. And then he said something nobody in that studio had expected. "I remember why I said it," Johnny said quietly. "I don't remember the exact words, but I remember why. Because I walked into that green room, and you were sitting there, and you looked exactly the way I felt in 1962 when I took over this show. Like a man who is performing being fine, and doing it well enough that everybody believes it except him." He paused. "I recognized it. I knew what it felt like from the inside." The woman in the 4th row was crying. She had not made a decision to cry. It had simply happened. The way things happen when the thing being said is true enough to bypass all normal defenses. "I had no idea it stayed with you," Johnny continued. His voice was steady now, but it was the steadiness of effort, of a man holding something carefully because he knows that if he sets it down, it will shatter. "I said it and walked away and probably forgot about it by morning." He looked at Burt. "You've been carrying that for 4 years. I needed to," Burt said. "And now you don't. And now I don't." There was a silence between them that was not empty. It was the silence of a held hand, full warm, carrying more information than speech ever could. Johnny turned to face the camera. Not with the smooth, practiced movement of a man performing a moment. With the slow, slightly unsteady movement of a man who has just been handed something he didn't know he needed and is trying to figure out what to do with it. I've done this job for 16 years, Johnny said, and his voice was different from any voice the audience had ever heard him use. I have tried to be present. I have tried to actually listen to the people across this desk. I have tried to see them rather than interview them. I thought I knew whether it was working. He paused. I had no idea. His voice caught slightly on that last word, just enough to hear. I genuinely had no idea. Nobody applauded, not because they didn't want to. Because the room understood, collectively and without discussion, that applause would be the wrong thing. That what this moment needed was not celebration but witness. The switchboard at NBC started receiving calls before that segment was even finished. What happened after the cameras stopped was not recorded and not described in detail by the people who witnessed it. But two members of the production crew who were still on set when the studio cleared have said, separately, that Johnny Carson and Burt Reynolds sat together at that desk for nearly 20 minutes after the official wrap. The studio lights still half up, the audience long gone, talking in a way that the crew had the professional grace to not approach. The stage manager said the folded yellow paper was still on the desk when they finally stood up. Then Johnny picked it up, read it one more time, and placed it carefully in his jacket pocket. He kept it there for a week before moving it somewhere he considered safer, a small wooden box in his home office. The same box where he kept things that were not for public consumption or professional display. A photograph, a letter from his father, and now a folded yellow page covered in someone else's handwriting, written in a parking lot at 2 in the morning, on the night a man decided to stay. In the days that followed the broadcast, calls to NBC came from every state. Not all of them were about Burt Reynolds or Johnny Carson specifically. Many were about the thing underneath the conversation, the thing about performing fine, the thing about the private distance between the person everyone sees and the person who sits in the kitchen at midnight because the grocery store requires a kind of energy you do not have, the thing about being seen, the thing about one specific person, in one specific moment, saying exactly the right true thing at exactly the right terrible time without knowing either of those things about themselves. Mental health professionals noted a specific increase in what they called connection calls in the 48 hours following the broadcast. People who had not told anyone how they were really doing, who sat down after watching that program and picked up the telephone or walked into a room where someone was and said, "I need to tell you something." One segment, 6 words, tens of thousands of people putting down something they had been carrying alone. Burt Reynolds would talk about that night with care for the rest of his career. He did not turn it into an anecdote or a story to tell at parties. When he mentioned it the way people mention things that still matter more than they know how to say. Quietly, specifically, without ornamentation. He said once, in a small interview in the early 90s, that it was the most important thing he had ever done on television. Not a performance, not a film. A conversation in 1977 where he put a piece of paper on a desk and said, "Thank you. I'd been carrying it alone for 4 years," he said. The moment I put it down, something lifted. Something I didn't even know was heavy until it was gone. Johnny Carson retired from The Tonight Show in 1992. A reporter asked him about the most meaningful conversation he had ever had across that desk. He did not mention presidents. He did not mention the icons or the legends or the nights that made headlines. He said the name of a man from Florida who had grown up wanting to play football and ended up becoming the most charming movie star in the world, and had walked in one night with a folded piece of yellow paper and the courage to put it down. He came back to say thank you, Johnny said. I spent 16 years trying to see people clearly. That night, someone came back to tell me I had once, when it mattered. He was quiet for a moment. That's enough. That's more than enough for any life. Burt Reynolds passed away on September 6, 2018. He was 82 years old. Among the tributes that followed, the one that drew the widest attention came from a statement released quietly by Johnny Carson's estate. 3 sentences, characteristic of a man who spent a lifetime saying the most important things in the fewest words. In 1973, Burt Reynolds sat across from Johnny Carson and let himself be seen. In 1977, he came back to say that it had mattered. For 45 years, he carried the proof that even the smallest act of genuine attention can save a life. On the night of September 6, 2018, someone on the production staff of a late-night television program placed a single folded piece of paper on the host's desk before the show began. No note, no explanation, just paper on a desk as a gesture, as a reminder, as proof that being buddy is enough. It was always enough. Now, before you go, if this story moved you, there are three things I want to ask of you tonight, and I mean all three of them. First, subscribe. I know you've heard it before, but I genuinely see it every single week. Comments from people who say they watch these videos regularly and had no idea they weren't subscribed. If you enjoy the channel, please take 1 second right now to check and make sure you are subscribed. It is completely free, it helps this channel more than most people realize, and it keeps stories like this one alive. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Second, hit the like button. It sounds small. It is not small. Every like is a signal that this kind of storytelling, slow, honest, built for people who still believe a story can mean something, is worth making. It costs you nothing and it means more than you know. Third, and this one comes from the heart. We recently opened the join feature on this channel, and I want to take a moment to be real with you about why it matters. This channel has no sponsors, not one. No brand deals, no product placements, no one paying us to say their name between stories about Johnny Carson. Everything here exists purely because of this community. Joining gives you access to exclusive member-only videos, stories we create specifically for members, deeper dives into the lives behind the legends, content we don't put anywhere else. It's a way to go beyond watching and actually be part of what makes this possible. If these stories have ever found you on a hard night and given you something you needed, consider joining. The button is right there next to subscribe. We are a small team that cares deeply about this work, and your support is what keeps the lights on. And finally, think of the person in your life who said the right true thing at the right terrible moment. The one who called you by your real name when everyone else was using the easier one. The one who sat with you in an empty room and asked what was going on and then actually waited for the real answer. They probably have no idea what that moment meant to you. They probably went home and forgot it by morning. Tell them. You don't need a television studio. You don't need 4 years of preparation and a folded piece of yellow paper. You just need to say the words. Because somewhere right now, someone is carrying something you gave them without knowing it. They have been carrying it for years. They have been reading it on the hard nights, the midnight kitchen nights, the nights when the distance to the bottom looks very close. Let them put it down. Let them say thank you. Drop your city and your country in the comments and tell us about the person who said the right thing at the right time. Tell us their name. Tell us what they said. Let's remember them here together because they deserve to be remembered. And if you are the one in the midnight kitchen right now, I want you to know something. Someone saw you. Someone wrote it down. Someone has been meaning to tell you for a long time. Stay.